The thing about predictions is that they're hard, especially about the future. And I'm not here to predict anything in the next 5 or 10 years. I'm here to ask a useful question. If AI makes many forms of cognitive work cheap, what happens to value? What does the world look like when intelligence becomes cheap? And in particular, what becomes and stays valuable in such a world? AI may increase productivity, but the most important fact may be that intelligence becomes cheap. In such a world, value shifts towards people and firms that can turn AI into something productive. Let's get you situated with an example. In one large field study, more than 5,000 customer support agents were given access to an AI assistant. Productivity rose by 15%, and that's about 1.5 days every 2 weeks of work. But the biggest and most important fact is that productivity increases. The people who benefited the most were not necessarily the highest performers. They were the workers with less experience. A separate experiment took 444 college professionals doing college-educated writing tasks, such as press releases, short reports, analysis plans, and emails. Half had access to ChatGPT. That AI-assisted half finished around 37% faster than its non-AI counterparts. And that's really impressive. Interestingly, output also increased. Of course, all of this was judged by human evaluators from somewhat similar professions. We see another related pattern in software. In experiments involving roughly 5,000 developers, generative AI tools increased completed tasks by 26%. Researchers also observed more commits and more successful runs. And once again, the gains were larger for less experienced workers. Customer support, professional writing, and coders. While all of these involve knowledge work, they're quite different from one another. Yet, the evidence points in roughly the same direction, that an increase in AI usage increases productivity for lower skilled workers. And it seems that AI is more of a leveler of skill differences than an increase. But this is only one side of the larger story. It becomes really interesting when we look at what kinds of tasks AIs help with. Consultants used AI across a range of realistic business tasks. On tasks that fit within the AI's capability range, performance increased by 12%, and they did them 25% faster. And that's a lot. But on a task that looked plausible for AI, but that it can't quite do, accuracy dropped significantly. Instead of answering 84% of the time, accuracy fell to 60 to 70%. The same improvement that increases and benefits work in one area can quietly degrade it in another, because humans over-rely on tools that aren't yet ready for the job. We'll come back to this as it's really important. Researchers call this the jagged technological frontier. AI doesn't get better, or any technology doesn't get better in a clean, predictable line from easy tasks to hard tasks. Instead, it can vary a lot from tasks here, tasks there. There's a lot of variable. What matters is the people and how they use AI in productive ways. And people need to know where that usefulness ends. And this graph here, it's AI generated. As you can tell, it's not that well, and you might think that AI can make a graph like this. Well, the jagged frontier hits us here. Economic history gives us a very useful warning here. Electricity was very transformative in the early years, but the firms didn't become radically more efficient the moment they plugged machines into a wall. They had to redesign factory layouts, redesign processes around electric power, and that took time. The same thing happened with computers. The biggest productivity norms applied to those changes after firms changed how work was organized. The technology, of course, mattered, but what mattered is how it was applied. A recent study covering over 12,000 firms across Europe and the United States found that AI adoption was associated with a roughly 4% increase in labor productivity. That is a lot in the grand scheme of things. The gains were not concentrated from smaller firms. It was more concentrated from medium to large firms. And the mechanism also matters. AI only came together with training, data, and software. That is the only way that that was possible. Simply having access to AI is not enough to be successful. At this point, 3 conclusions begin to emerge. 1, that AI increases productivity in very real ways. 2nd, it does not do it reliably across all sorts of different tasks. And 3, the largest gains don't come merely from access to technology, but from the ability to integrate it well. This brings us back to the question that we started with. If some forms of intelligence becomes cheap, what happens to value? If drafts become easier to produce, if summaries are instant, and if code suggestions are also instant, then that becomes scarce. Those parts of cognitive work become much more scarce. And the evidence suggests that value doesn't disappear. Rather, it suggests that value shifts elsewhere. It shifts towards deciding what matters and how to apply this. As you might imagine, this matters a lot for early career workers and students. A lot of early professional work requires drafts, early versions, memos, analysis, these drafts that AI can do. But that value does not disappear. Rather, the job of the student, the career worker, shifts to managing that execution and overcoming the barriers that AI is weak. So who becomes more valuable? Perhaps not simply the person who can ask a better question, who can check whether the answer is okay. What really matters is who can decide what should happen next. It is clear that when intelligence becomes easier to access, other human capabilities begin to emerge, and it's easier to perceive. That is the question I want to leave you with. AI may take many kinds of cognitive work faster, cheaper, and more efficient, and widely available. But the evidence also suggests that benefits are uneven, that technology is unreliable in ways that matter, and the real gains depend on how it is used by humans. So, in the end, it is not about who can create the most, but who can decide what matters. Thank you.